So far we have looked at solving quadratic equations by factoring, and then when we couldn't factor, we solved using the quadratic formula. Today we are going to learn another method which is called completing the square. And you will have to memorize these steps. It says to solve the quadratic equation in the form, same form we've been looking at, by completing the square. What you end up doing is you get your x's on one side of the equation and any other numbers on the other side. That's step one. Step 2, divide by the constant in the leading term to make the leading constant equal to 1. And I'll show you when we get to that in problem number 1. This is the third step, and it's one of the more difficult steps. You take half of the b term and square it. And you can see in parentheses what that means. And add it to both sides. That's why it's called complete the square. Factor, and then solve for x by taking the square root. Let's look at our first problem. The first step we have to do for complete the square is get x's on one side, numbers on the other. So the first thing I'm going to do is subtract 1. So I'll have 2x squared plus 4x equals negative 1. Step 2 says divide by the constant in the leading term. Well, this is the leading term because it's the highest power. The constant is a 2. What we are going to do is divide by 2. But if you divide one thing by 2, you divide everything by 2. So we'll end up getting x squared plus 2x equals negative 1/2. That's step 2. Step 3 says take half of the b term and square it, and then add it to both sides. Well, my b term is in front of x, so half of 2 is 1. And then what you have to do is you square 1. Well, 1 squared is 1. And then you add it to both sides. So it's going to be x squared plus 2x plus 1 equals negative 1/2 plus 1. Step 4 says factor the equation. Well, look at the left-hand side of that equation. X squared plus 2x plus 1. X squared plus 2x plus 1 factors to x plus 1 times x plus 1. And then on the right-hand side, negative 1/2 plus 1 is 1/2. Follow along with me here. X plus 1 times x plus 1, that's the same as x plus 1 squared equals 1/2. Step 5 says solve for x by taking the square root of both sides. So I'm going to take the square root of this left-hand side and the square root of the right. The square root of x plus 1 squared is x plus 1. We learned that when we were doing radicals. When you take the square root of 1/2, this is another big mistake people make. When you take the square root of a number, you get a positive and a negative. So plus or minus 1/2, radical 1/2. From there, we subtract the 1 to solve for x. And we would get x equals negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 1/2. And that would be our final answer there. And that's it. Let's look at our next one. Same idea. We're going to follow the same steps we just did. Okay, in this problem, we have x squared minus 6 equals 0. First step, get x's on one side, numbers on the other. So let's add the 6. So we'll have x squared equals 6. From there, you look and you see you just have a regular old 1x squared. Now the second step did say divide by the constant in front of the x squared. Well, if the constant's just a 1, when you divide by a 1, it's just going to be, nothing's going to change. So if it's just an x squared, leave it. You can skip step 2. Step 3 says take half of the b value. Well, notice you have no x. If you don't have an x, that means you don't have a b value. So half of 0 is 0. 0 squared is 0. And then you add it to both sides. Now I am going to show it just so you know I did the step. Technically we are just adding 0 to both sides. When I add 0 to both sides, I get x squared equals 6. Next step, take the square root of both sides to solve for x. So when I take the square root of x squared, you get x. And remember, when I take the square root of 6, it's plus or minus radical 6. Nothing to add or subtract, it's already just an x equals, so your answer is x equals plus or minus radical 6. Okay, this next one looks a little more difficult, but it's not going to be as bad as you think. Okay, problem 3 says 1/4 x squared plus 3/4 x equals 3/2. What I want you to do first is we have to get x's on one side, numbers on the other. If you look, that's done for us already. The next step is to divide by the constant in front of x squared. Well, the constant in front of x squared is not a 1 here like it was last time, it's a 1/4. And if you have to use your calculator for these fractions, it's fine, just type carefully. 1/4 divided by 1/4 is an x squared. Plus 3/4 x divided by 1/4 is going to be 3x. And then 3/2 divided by 1/4 is going to be 6. Let me just check to make sure. Yes, 6. Okay, from there, x is on one side, numbers on the other. Number in front is just an x squared, or just a 1. Take half of the b value. Well, half of 3, I'm going to show this off to the side. Half of 3 you're saying is 1/2 probably. Please keep it as a fraction, so 3/2. Well, step 3 says take half of the b and square it. So we got to square 3/2. When you square a fraction, you square the numerator and you square the denominator. So 3 squared is 9, 2 squared is 4. That is what you add to both sides. Then we have to factor that left-hand side. And looking at that left-hand side, that does not look easy to factor. But I am going to give you something that works every single time when you complete the square. It will always factor to half of the b. To see what I mean, let's look above at this problem number 1. If you look back, half of the b value was, half of this 2 was a positive 1. And look, it factored to x plus 1, x plus 1. And so when we go down here, problem 2 is not the best to show because of zeros. But what we are going to do down here is we look at our b value, which is a 3. Half of 3 we said was, let me move this up a little bit, 3/2. So this is going to factor to a x plus 3/2 quantity squared equals. And if you do 6 plus 9/4 in your calculator, you will get as a fraction 33/4. To solve for x, what we do is you take the square root of both sides. Taking the square root of the left-hand side gives you x plus 3/2. Taking the square root of the right, we remember it's plus or minus. The square root of 33 doesn't break down, but the square root of 4 is a 2. From there, finally, the last step to solve for x is to subtract the 3/2. So you get x equals negative 3/2 plus or minus the square root of 33/2. And that's our final answer there. At this point, what I would like you to do is to try the 2 do now problems, and we will go over it in class tomorrow.